Alright, everyone, welcome back to another social studies video. This will actually be social studies week 3. I don't want to confuse everyone. We didn't really have a week 2 video because it was just more about Columbus that we kind of talked about the first time. But today we're going to be talking about the English and Spanish colonies. It's kind of the main things that happened after Columbus. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So I just want to start by giving some historical framing to everything that we've kind of covered and what's going to be going on forward. So we already know that Columbus had come to the Americas in 1492. He landed in the Bahamas. But kind of after that, what had happened was other explorers started coming over from all over the world, and they started setting up these colonies. And because there were all these other explorers coming, you really saw two key players throughout history who really made waves in colonization. The main two that we're going to focus on is the British Empire and the Spanish Empire. Um, they were both immensely powerful, and although you had other colonies like the French and other countries kind of setting up colonies throughout the world, the main two we're focusing on are the Spanish and the British because they arguably had the two largest impacts on America. So, aside from the other explorers starting to come, you have this guy named Hernan Cortez who really started colonizing South America, and he was Spanish, and this actually went through parts of Mexico, and we're going to kind of get into what kind of conquistador he was. Following that, in 1585, you had the colony of Roanoke that was established, but it was actually abandoned 5 years later, and it's kind of a cool American mystery. Outside of that, you had England establishing Plymouth in 1620 and Jamestown in 1607, which is the start of the English colonization in America. And then lastly, and one of arguably the biggest colonization that happened was when the 13 colonies were established after Plymouth and would remain that way until the Declaration of Independence in 1776. So let's go ahead and get a little more of the specifics. So why did people come here? The big reason that people kept coming to America and South America was for the three G's. And as we remember, the three G's stand for God, gold, and glory. So for God, they wanted to spread their religion, which was either the Church of England or Catholicism from Spain. Gold, they wanted money and crops that they found profitable, and this drove this awfulness of the slave trade. So yes, the sugar and tobacco were key money-making crops, as well as all the gold that was just in the Americas. And then glory, they just wanted to do it. At this point, it was a race to see who could settle the most of America and claim it as their own. It was the new world, and everyone just kind of wanted to establish America as their own. And so as a result, colonies were made. And just a reminder, a colony is a place ruled by another country far away from itself. So whenever I'm talking about Spanish colonies, this is in South America, but it's ruled by Spain. And like the British colonies were ruled by Great Britain, but they were in North America. That's really important to know what a colony is. So we are in different continents. So you had people in Europe ruling over people in North and South America, which would cause some problems later on. So let's first talk about some Mexican colonizations. What I want you to know about Mexico's colonization was this conquistador right here named Hernan Cortez, who was a Spanish conquistador who was looking to spread the three G's. Um, his main conquest was he defeated the Aztec Empire, and he pushed colonies up through Mexico and eventually leading into Texas. So the Aztecs were like the main Native American tribes in South America. They were extremely powerful, and the other Native Americans down there did not mess with the Aztecs. But this guy, using his technology and strategy, actually ended up beating them, and that was really what made Hernan Cortez famous. Again, as we remember about conquistadors, they were not great people. They were spreading disease. They were killing Native Americans. They were doing all sorts of bad things, but it is part of the South American history and part of the reason that the Spanish culture is so prominent uh, down in that part of the world. But that's the main takeaways I want you to have about Mexican colonization for now. Um, Whenever we talk a little bit about Texas history, we'll see how this really comes into play. But I want to spend the majority of this focusing on the British history that would kind of lead to the American Revolution later on. So before we can really get into 13 colonies, I want us to talk about Roanoke. So Roanoke was the first colony established by British pilgrims in 1585 by Sir Walter Raleigh. So this was the first colony that the British people had set up. Um, it did not go well. As we can see, they had poor relations with local Native American tribes. So they did not get along with the Native Americans who were also there. They managed to hold out for a little longer, but what really happened was prominent guys like John White and other settlers came in 1587, and John White helped rule the colony, but it really didn't go well. He went back to England to get supplies because think of it back then, they didn't really have all the technologies that we have now. They didn't have heat, they didn't have refrigerators, they didn't have AC. So winters especially were really, really harsh on the people who were there. So John White went back to get supplies from England because he didn't want to chance anything with the Native Americans around there. But when he came back in 1590, everything was abandoned. The only thing that they found was the word Croatoan on a tree, um, and the I believe that was in reference to the island of Croatoa, which was around them. But again, no one really knows why that was found there, and we really don't have any answers about the colony because everything was gone. Um, the widespread belief is that many believe that Native Americans ended up wiping them out because there were such poor relations. But again, no one knows. It's kind of a really cool American mystery and one that's like kept me very interested in it for a long time. But this was near the James River in Virginia. Um, so, following this, you had the colony of Jamestown, which was founded in 1607 near the James River. So, it's not too far away from Roanoke, um, but it was the first British colony to actually last. Again, it was in Virginia, and we know about Jamestown was that Native Americans did not really like the colonizers. Um, so Jamestown was still very important because it was like the first colony to last. It lasted nearly 100 years, but it would actually expand into Virginia. But again, Native Americans constantly attacked them, and it was just not a good time to be a settler living in Jamestown. Following Jamestown, you had another big colony. This time it was Plymouth. Plymouth was founded in 1620 near Massachusetts. So the people who actually sailed on the Mayflower and landed in Plymouth were actually supposed to be going down to Virginia to help the colonists down in Jamestown. But they got a little off course and ended up landing in Massachusetts, or what would become Massachusetts later on. The main thing I want us to take away is that the people sailed there on the boat called the Mayflower, which is why the next part is very important. Plymouth is famous for having the first form of written law in America, and that was in the form of the Mayflower Compact. This would actually go on to help Americans write documents like the Constitution. It was really like a written form of law that was extremely important. And you guys might have seen Plymouth because it was settled by Pilgrim people and is famous for the idea of Thanksgiving. Again, we know that there was not very good relations between the Native American people and the people who colonized. I just want you to think about that. Imagine a bunch of random people coming from all over the world who you didn't know what they were saying. The language was completely different. Um, it was just not good relations. They didn't know why they were here, but all they did was saw these people stealing stuff from their land that they had been on for a long, long time. and we could see how that would hurt Native American and colon colonizers' relations over time. It kind of really established uh, what would go wrong later on. But again, when you hear Thanksgiving, the idea comes from what happened in Plymouth. But following this, we're getting into some really cool stuff, and that is the 13 colonies. Yes, the 13 colonies. I wish I could move my picture a little further away, but the 13 colonies uh, is this area of New England and going partly into the South. So the 13 colonies that came after Plymouth and Jamestown were Virginia, New York, Massachusetts Bay, Maryland, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Delaware, North Carolina, South Carolina, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. These 13 colonies would become the first 13 states and were very famous because they actually were the ones who declared their independence from Great Britain, because Great Britain was ruling over all of these colonies. And we'll get into more of that when we're talking about the Revolutionary War. But these 13 colonies really established that the Americas could be fought on. They could fight on their own, and they were just immensely important because if the 13 colonies wouldn't have won the American Revolution uh, and formed America, uh, we might not actually be here today. We might still be a British colony. But again, we'll talk more about that when we do the American Revolution. Um, but I've kind of led into what's next, and that will be the American Revolution that we'll talk about. So I hope this video helped you kind of guide what we're doing this week. If you have any questions, as always, be sure to ask them in class. But I hope to see you guys next time and enjoy your weekend.